It was not uncommon to see religious icons even in public spaces that aren't necessarily secular. So I've got these iconic tapestries hanging up. And so I try to design them so that the backgrounds would let you know what side this is. So for these, you can see the backgrounds are in greenish hues, and on the other side, they're blue.
So that you have Roman numerals on the chariots to tell them apart. Do you want to tell us about maybe how you dressed them and the tools they're using?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, they had their reins actually tied to them. And so I came up with this idea, this belt. My son works with leather, so he actually made that belt for me, made their helmets for them as well.
Oh, and wow.
So I just had straps of leather that I had my human models hold as they're posing for me. But it's interesting because when I had tied them up on that ring that's attached to their belt, it automatically kind of wanted to fall into kind of a like a roll shape, like a roll of tape or something. And these are things that it's like you kind of have to see it in real life to know how that's really going to work. So that's just kind of one of those things that's nice about working from a real reference rather than just trying to make it up.
There are a lot of people who love the Byzantine Empire that are really going to enjoy this.
If anybody wants to see how I work, I made a stop motion movie of me painting the Hippodrome painting. It's you can find the link on my website.
You painted some extraordinary works of art that I would like to go through in some detail. You've kind of initiated what would be a private project for yourself. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah. So probably 15 years ago now, it was around 2010. So I told you that Ian's name would crop back up again. So this is where it's coming back up. So he and another friend of ours, Paul Toplis, who works at Pixar, they had a show of their work in a small gallery in Paris. I'd mentioned that it was really cool that he and Paul had this show in Paris. And I said, I'm thinking about getting back into painting again. At this point, I hadn't painted really in 20 years because I was all into the working digitally thing. And I was perfectly happy just being a gun for hire and working on shows and not doing anything for myself. But I got to a point where I really wanted to get back into painting again. And he says, well, why don't we do a project together and we'll have a show together? And so I thought that was great. I mean, God, I get to work with Ian. Are you kidding? That would be awesome. So he said, why don't we write a story together and then we can illustrate it with the paintings? He made the connection that the story of 1001 Arabian Nights, the 1001 Arabian Nights is a compendium of different stories, but they're told by a character who's like the framing story. It's about her that we get all these other stories. And so Scheherazade, exactly. So the stories she tells are to keep herself alive from night to night. But nobody really knows when the original framing story of Scheherazade, when that actually began. They have a rough idea, just as they don't really know when Le Morte d'Arthur, all the Arthurian stories started. But there was not an Arthur, but if he did live, it would have been in the 6th century. And so Ian had thought, it's possible that the story of Scheherazade could have been in the same century. Why don't we write a story that combines both of those mythologies? And then we can just, illustrate. That would give us a nice tapestry we can illustrate with these paintings. He stayed up all night and he typed up this treatment for an idea for combining the two mythologies together. He really likes mysticism and magic and that kind of stuff. And I'm more grounded in reality. And so I did another treatment. He looked at it and goes, yeah, it's good, but maybe if you change a couple things around. So when I got to the 4th treatment, I thought, okay, I want to really give it some detail, kind of get some interesting, I thought, set pieces integrated into a story that would make good paintings. But I spent the next 3 years on that. And so by researching for the story, it also served the purpose of researching for the paintings. And so, so when it came time to actually doing the paintings, I had a lot more background information that normally you probably wouldn't have in that situation. The third part of the story, and probably half the actual book in terms of word count, takes place in Constantinople.
Yes.
And so I had to know a lot about who is the emperor then? And so, and again, I integrated Constantinople because I really thought the Hagia Sophia was a cool building and I wanted to work it into the story.
Oh, awesome.
And of course, it was built during the reign of Justinian, so I had to learn about Justinian, and I had to learn about the Hagia Sophias that existed there before the one that's currently there, and
Yep.
the Nika revolts, and Narcissus and all these other people. And so it was just kind of cool to kind of just get the exposure to that whole part of human history that normally doesn't get taught in history classes.
When I looked at your art, the more I started to examine it, and the more I really got in and took a deeper look at it, I was enamored with it because there's so much detail, so much imagination, and I place a premium on imagination. And I wanted to share some of that with anyone else who has a passing interest in art and or the Byzantine Empire. So let's start with this one piece here. All right, so this is the Great Hippodrome of Constantinople. Some of the ruins are still there. I have seen them. I have been there myself in Istanbul. So this is an incredible painting. Now, this is just what it looks like at first pass, right? You got the Hippodrome, you got the track, you got the median, and this might even look rather unusual to some people, all this stuff on the median, but we'll get to that in a second. Back here in the distance, you can see a special seating area that is called the Kathisma. That's where the emperor sits. There's a church in the background, and there are many spectators here. So, Eric, do you want to walk me through this painting? I will zoom in on your command as you go. And because there's a lot happening in this one single image that may not be readily observable just at passing glance. So do you want to tell us about this piece of art?
Yeah, well, this is, again, it's illustrating a scene from the story, and the two characters in the foreground, the one that's got his hand up to his mouth, we see in profile, whispering in the ear of the other fellow who's he has his back to us, and he's kind of leaning over to hear what he's saying. They're actually characters in my story, and so what happens is that they were being chased by these by Roman guards. For what they were doing just previous to this scene. And so they were trying to evade them. And by doing what they're trying to evade the guards. So they run towards the Hippodrome because they can hear cheering in the stands. And so they run in and go up a staircase and emerge out on in the stands. And so they kind of mix themselves into the stands with the other spectators before the guards can see where they are. And so they,
okay.
They're trying to be incognito, and so at first they're clapping along with everybody else, and once they see the guards either haven't seen them or gave up the search, they kind of relax. And so the fellow on the right, who's listening to the guy talking, he's never been here before. This is his first time in the city. The guy on the left has been here before. He actually grew up in this city, and so he's shouting over the roar of the crowds what they're looking at, which is a procession of the charioteers coming into the stadium. And specifically, they're all cheering for the lead charioteer, who was another person who actually was a real person. That was Porphyrius, who's in this chariot right here. And so Porphyrius was an amazing person. He's like the most decorated charioteer in all of Byzantine history.
Yes.
And in my story, he actually is kind of a pivotal character. I won't give away more than that, but I wanted his character to be all business. So he's just kind of just standing there. He doesn't acknowledge the crowds. He's just there to do a job. But if you scroll over and see the other charioteers, they're all waving at the crowd and soaking in the adulation of the people in the stand.
Enjoying their celebrity.
Exactly. Yeah. So during the race, it was 7 laps. They ran counterclockwise on the track. They raced chariots called quadrigas. I can't even say
Quadriga.
it.
Yep.
Quadrigas. Thank you. Which consisted of 4 horses. And I did this painting before I did the other painting, and I was doing research for that one and realized that I made a big mistake on these, but I didn't want to repaint it. So they're just kind of this way, because I didn't really know exactly how the whole 4 horses pulling a chariot thing worked. And so I just kind of, made up how that would have worked. But there's 12 teams. And so there's 12 gates in the building in the background, which is called a carceres, with the exception of that middle opening. But you can see there's 6 gates on either side. And you can't really tell in this perspective, but the distance between that far building, the starting gates, and the end of the spina, which is that median down the middle of the track, is almost as far as it is going along the side of the spina. It's just kind of compressed in this view. And so in the time that they leave the starting gate to the time they get to the end of the spina, they need to be able to jockey into being in hopefully first position. Because otherwise there's just going to be a battle to get that by the end of the race. And to help make it so that having a particular starting gate is being a deficit because it's technically farther away, the spina is actually slightly curved. It's concaved, so that the distance from any of those starting gates to the end of the spina is actually the same distance, even though it looks like they're the ones that are in the middle are actually closer. They're actually not, because of the curvature of that building. And so I actually have that incorporated into the building too, in the way that the shadow falls across it and the way the roof tiles angle as they rake across the building. So now the question might be, why make it so detailed? And the answer to that is, I figured if I'm going through all the trouble of creating this painting, I wanted to at least make it as plausible to what could have really been there as possible. And we don't really have any definitive record other than just written testimonies by people that were there during the Fourth Crusade, 700 years after this image takes place, which the Hippodrome was already pretty much in ruin already, not completely ruined, but it had long been used for chariot races by that point. But some of the statuary along the spina still existed, and so we have some descriptions of that, which is what I based my painting on. But also there's sculptures that are at the bottom of the obelisk of Theodosia. Is it the Theodosia? Is that what, I can't remember now. Is that what it is? The obelisk of Theodosia? Yeah, the one, it's the Egyptian obelisk. On the base of that, there's actually a carving that depicts scenes in the Hippodrome that is also what I used for some of the details. In addition to what was done by the group Byzantium 1200, I used a lot of their reconstructions just for the basic layout of the stadium itself, and which they based theirs on actual archaeological evidence. So rather than reinventing the wheel, I just kind of used a lot of their research to get me a starting point into depicting this space. But
right.
as far as the statuary and everything, that's all my invention. But using what was written down in written accounts as to what things were there. Of course, they didn't describe exactly what they look like, but they mentioned that there was a bull, there was Casper and Pollux, there was wrestlers, there was the she-wolf suckling Romulus and Remus. There was an elephant, and so I just kind of used my own interpretation of how those were laid out and what they might have looked like.
Right. So. Yeah, so for people watching in, if you're a Byzantine enthusiast, you might know some of this already, but if you go to Istanbul today, this Egyptian obelisk stands there today, just like this. It looks just like this. It stands there today. And then this little thing, this is a triple-headed snake, the Delphi. That is still there. Part of it goes down into the ground a little bit. They've kind of built out some space there if you could see it, but I've laid eyes on this. So these parts of the spina are still, the median are still there. And so is this. I think this is the Theodosian obelisk. It's no longer covered in gold. And I don't think there is this circle on it anymore.
No, it's all masonry now. Yeah.
Right. It's all masonry, and it looks a little rough now, but this tall obelisk, this three-headed snake, and this Egyptian obelisk are still on display for all of us to see. So what's fascinating about looking at this is, while these stand today, you see to what extent Eric has had to imagine filling in the rest. It's like you've been given 1% or less than 1% of the detail needed, probably less than 1%. I mean, we're talking a fraction of 1% of what you're like, okay, you have this, and you have this. Go. So there's not a lot. Now we know what a hippodrome looks like. There's the Circus Maximus in Rome and all that. It's an oblong, U-shaped track, wheat brown. And, look at I love these details. You can see like where the chariots, the tracks of the chariots as they, from a prior race as they've spun around this track. So, and of course you have the spina here. This is the gold, covered in gold. And do you want to tell us about these?
Yeah. So there is one of the sources I used when I was creating this stuff was a picture I saw on a website that was a bas relief of one of these turning posts. One of these like, I think that technically it's called a meta, but it showed these conical sculptural shapes that were on top of this base. And so I use that as my reference for when I design these. And people have different interpretations of what these things look like. And
Right.
There's other paintings by 19th century painters that have depicted the Circus Maximus that have the three conical sculptural shapes as well. So that's kind of, I think, was sort of a standard for hippodromes in the Roman Empire. I took a little liberties with it to make it more visually interesting, but it's basically you use that bas relief as a starting point that I then kind of riffed on to make it more visually interesting.
And it looks just fantastic. I mean, it looks excellent, and you've even got the Greeks, square spirals lining this, and real good shadow work here on the. I mean, this is just amazing detail. And remember, folks, if you zoom out, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like from far away. But when you zoom in, you have all this other stuff. This relief here is telling a story. This relief here is telling a story. That's a floral work. You have gold work there, and then of course here, this is how you kept track of the laps. Mm-hmm. They would spill water. You'd pull this handle, and it would spill water down into the pool. These are pools of water, folks, on the median. And you see the buckets. I love it. The buckets. Looks like you have a couple ladders here. That's how they I guess that's how you imagine them refilling.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. So they would use these ladders to refill these dolphins. And with each lap, they would yank down on this, and it would spill water down into the pool below. And then any spectator from afar could see how many laps were left based on which one of these dolphins had been overturned.
Yeah, they had dolphins on one side, they had eggs on the other. And apparently in the real hippodrome, this side would have been the eggs and the far side would have been the dolphins. But I took some license. But I also put some eggs up on the carcass as well, because apparently they did have those there. And that was for the benefit of the charioteers themselves as they're rounding that corner. They just look to see how many eggs are left on the parapet up there.
So they didn't use a checkered flag. Is that it?
No.
Yeah. So I mean, you have to understand just one of these details you have to do a lot of research for, right? So if you decide, this piece of literature says there's a statue of an elephant. Okay. So what pose is this elephant going to be in? What is it going to be? It looks like it's greenish. Is this like a copper or a bronze or
just kind of thinking? So I was either thinking they were either going to be marble or bronze. So those are kind of the two materials that I picked. I made the Egyptian sphinxes are more of a like a granite, a black granite.
Yeah, I know that the Byzantine, it actually, it's funny. I thought it was actually, it might have been porphyry. They had this kind of purple marble they really like to use. And it's a real dark, almost grayish marble, and that's kind of what that looked like. That material. They look heavy. I'll say.
Yeah,
that.
I used the purple marble as accents on the hippodrome itself, like on the cathedra, and then the surrounding wall.
Oh, yep, yeah. There it is. Yeah, we'll get to that in 1 second. I just wanted to show the amount of detail that goes into this. I mean, you've got algae and lichen on the marble base of the pools here. What made you think of that detail?
I live somewhere that gets a lot of rain, so that's something we see a lot up here.
That's fantastic. So, I like the detail that you said where these guys are celebratory, and you even have some characterization. So that you're acting at the same time. You know, you're like, what's this guy doing? Is he into the fan? No, he's ready for game time. He's getting ready to. He's thinking of his first lap already. And now I noticed these two guys. You have they're wearing looks like Dalmatic robes here, and he's got green, and he's upholding a banner, and he's got blue. What's the thinking there?
Well, these are the factions. So at this point in time, there were 4 factions. There was red, white, blue, and green, and then over time, I forget who absorbed who, but eventually went down to the blues and the greens. And so when you had chariot races, it was the blues against the greens, and so. Not only were there those 2 teams, but the people in the stands were divided into seating that was dedicated to those factions as well. And so I just kind of thought of them as just being the people that they're holding the banner for their it's like the mascot for their particular team that they would be representing. And then the 2 figures in front of them would be like the clergy. So the one thing in studying this time period was that religion was everywhere, and so it was not uncommon to see religious icons even in public spaces that aren't necessarily secular. So I've got these iconic tapestries hanging up, and so I try to design them so that the backgrounds would let you know what side this is. So for these, you can see the backgrounds are in greenish hues, and on the other side they're blue, and then. I've got these banners that the fans would hang over the side of the surrounding ring, and they would taunt the other side in either Greek or Latin. So, but I just typed in insults into Google Translate and just painted what it kicked out. So it may not actually be grammatically accurate, but unless you speak those languages, I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, that's true, and. I personally really appreciate the level of imagination you're putting into this. So for those listening, and this warrants a little bit of explanation, this is one of the reasons it's hard to write them or paint in this period, because, the racing factions, you think of them as, they're fans of the blue chariots, fans of the green chariots, but there's a lot more to it. It was kind of like a civilian militia that was mixed into these racing factions. If the city walls were damaged under an attack, you could summon the blues or the greens to go fix the walls, clear debris. So they had a public service attribute to them. But they also had a major political attribute, which is worth noting. The blues and the greens became essentially radicalized by the powers that be. And around this time, the greens, well, actually, probably just before this time, you're in the age of Justinian here. So
yeah, this takes place in the year 540.
So 540. Okay, so Justinian's firmly entrenched at that point. The wars have begun at that point. So before Justinian's time, for almost 200 years, the Greens were the dominant faction. And this was a long period of upheaval. So you'd have riots over religious policies where radicalized racing factions would spill out of this hippodrome and go riot in the streets over certain policy disagreements. And this is a big deal because, as you see, this is the kathisma. This is where the emperor sits. Well, his people are sitting right there. Here's the blue. You have people sitting right below. So what they would do is they would have professional criers shout up to the emperor, hey, we don't like your tariffs or, whatever. They would shout up, change your policy. And they would have, and the emperor would have a professional crier. He would shout down, either be quiet and watch the races, or he'd be like, I will take you under consideration what you're saying. So there was communication. This was a massive political function, which is very unusual because they didn't have representative government. You didn't have representatives speaking for you. So this is where you represented yourself in the public in this sphere. And so, Eric has captured this sort of crazy spirit in the sports mentality, but it's also fused with wild, rabid political overtones. So in here you got the blues and the greens. They would bet on the races, and fortunes are won and lost based on who won. And what else did you do? So what else, Eric? What did you do to capture some of that reality, this strange reality of these political racing sports crowds?
I'm not sure about the question. So what do you mean?
So you as far as these political racing like sports crowds, you've got the blues and the greens represented here.
Well, yeah, one of the things that so these are just conjecture on my part, but if you zoom in on the left where you were, you got the two pavilions. If you zoom in on that, so I made that fence that actually separates the two sides. So everything on this side of that interlocking fence is the green side, and beyond that is the blues. So I just figured that it wouldn't be uncommon for there to be, riots breaking out. And so I wanted to have some kind of barrier that would keep them from actually being able to go after each other. So I have that on this side. And then on the other side, right below the emperor's box, I have a couple of gates that help separate them as well.
Yes. So on one side you'd have the blues, and on the other side you'd have the greens, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So so you can imagine, especially if you got these seats right up close, if one side wants a policy, you'd probably have this side right over here shouting this side down because they are for the policy and they're against the policy. So it could get pretty ugly. And I just don't think a lot of people knew that because it's an unusual form of people speaking to power back then. Mm-hmm. Now down here, you've got an awning with some people sitting in seats. It looks like a guy in a desk.
Yes, I figured this this area I call the judging tent, and so I just figured they would have representatives from both teams that would sit and watch the finish line to be able to determine if it was a photo finish. They're the guys who determine who actually won a race, and then we've got a scribe who would actually write down the results of it. Again, I'm just making all this up, but it just seemed plausible. So
I love that detail. So I mean, you've got all sorts of stuff. I love this. When I saw this, I was wondering what specifically you had in mind, and that is outstanding. That's an outstanding detail. Also, I noted and it struck me too that you put things on the track. And I realized, like when we saw the movie Gladiator, anything on that track looked like it was going to get run over and just demolished. But you have tents and pavilions and the judging station. And the way you've painted this, it made me realize just how wide each straightaway really is. And so most of the action would be congregated around this median. And it makes sense that there'd be this space here where you'd have almost like a shoulder where a chariot could peel away if it was broken or damaged. And is this kind of like pit row over here?
Yeah, so the reason why I put those tents there is that when I was designing this, it was a lot of open space, and it just bugged me. It was just too much open space. So I thought, well, what would be a plausible thing to put there? And I thought, well, what if they had these pavilions for the different sides, and they can be like, if there's an injured charioteer, that's where they would whisk them away to be able to tend to their wounds, and then also have a place to put their broken chariots and things. And so I've got that chariot in the foreground that has a missing wheel, so you can kind of tell what happened there. And then I've got that like hand cart, and you can see the marks left in the track. If you follow those marks, you see they kind of go to the end of the spina. So it kind of gives you the idea that thing was used to rescue somebody in the middle of a collision at the track. So you can see how they it like wheeled out there like to rescue somebody. It originally was somewhere else, and they came back to where it's resting now.
Oh, wow. I didn't even notice that. You could follow this track. So this is like your Byzantine gurney.
Exactly. Yeah.
Somebody ran it out there.
Yeah.
For a chariot wrecked. And by the way, there was injuries all the time. They're not gladiators, but these guys, this is a full contact sport. And if if you're going full speed, remember, this is essentially a 4 horsepower vehicle back then. So you're going pretty fast. There's a lot of contact. If you go flying out of the back of this chariot, there's a good chance you're going to get yourself twisted up. And,
back then, they actually their reins were actually fixed to their bodies. They couldn't just hop off. I mean, if their team got away from the chariot itself, you'd be dragged along the ground. Now they had a knife that they had with them that they can cut themselves loose. But that'd be a little comfort if the chariot's tumbling all over your body as you're being dragged along the along the
Well,
track. So it was definitely a dangerous sport.
yeah, at that point, that's a tool of last resort, because even in my story, I mentioned something called a mattock, and which is an axe, and they would have these axes. So if this thing goes tumbling, now you can imagine at full speed, something gets loose, this thing's going to be over, tumbling. You can get tied up pretty quick. So this axe was meant for you to be able to chop the leather straps to get yourself the heck out of there. Because the last thing you want is for this guy coming up behind you to run right over you. You want to get off that track pretty quick. So I love seeing this kind of attention to detail where you have a medical staff. Are they the Green Cross?
Yeah, I just picked something that looked good.
I was just teasing. But you have a medical staff here. You've got supplies and provisions. I see you have blue and green tent to stick with that motif. You have them in, blue, green to make it even as possible. Some sort of squires or other equestrians or medical staff or something to help these guys. So, you do get a sense when you look at this of the scale, the pageantry, and what I appreciate, I think, the most is you are telling stories within stories within stories with this picture. Like I said, when I zoom in, I'm seeing stories. This one detail tells a story.
Mm-hmm.
This one detail, and this, maybe the guy who would run this thing out there, he's sitting right here on this rug, in downtime before the action starts.
Mm-hmm.
Moving up here real quick, I see a nice promenade.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this walking space, and I love the sunlight. It, like you said, it's just the right amount of detail for me to really get a sense of the sunlight in the daytime. You've got shadows here from the colonnade up above. If you look on this side, you got a colonnade. So you thought to put the shadows of the colonnade from behind here that we can't quite see all of it onto the track. So how did you handle the crowd? You obviously painted each individual here.
Yeah. So this is the one nice sort of benefit of working digitally all these years is that for the work I do professionally as a matte painter, I'm working in all using digital tools, and one of those is building models. I'll build 3D models of things, and so for all the paintings I did for this project so far, anyway, well, with the exception of the one I'm working on right now, I built this whole environment as a 3D model in the computer, and
wow!
And so that's where I could be able to. And it wasn't like it made it simple. It took me 7 months to build the model.
Wow!
But the nice thing about doing that is it allowed me to be able to try like different lighting scenarios or different camera angles or this sort of thing. And so it allowed me the freedom of not being married to a specific look from the get-go. I could be able to determine that. Now, once I started the painting, obviously I had to make a decision and say, okay, this is how it's going to look. But the other thing is that all the people in the stands are all 3D people. And that was actually quite difficult because they're instanced. And so I built like 30 or 40 prototype people, and then it randomly generated them in the stands. And so I didn't actually know what they look like until I rendered it. So it's not like I could just say, I want to remove this one guy. You couldn't do it. You just kind of had to. Now you could change the seed, and so it would reiterate them in a different setup, but I couldn't like on an individual basis be able to say, yeah, I want to get rid of that guy. I just kind of had to go with what I had, but I liked how it presented them. And so all the people you see there were 3D models, except the people in the foreground are actually real people in costume that I photographed as reference.
I was just going to ask you about that. If you used real models so which ones? These three guys?
Well, yeah, all the people that are in the extreme foreground. So if you go from the very left, that fist coming in, that's a real person. The guy right behind him is a real person. Even those pair of hands that are kind of right on the edge of frame, right behind that guy's head. If you kind of go up, see it's almost like praying hands. They're looking up.
Where is it?
Very far into front end of frame. See the guy on the very far left. We can see he's wearing like a red sash. Okay, see the hands right past his head on the left. right there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, down. Yeah, right next to his head. Those are real hands. So starting from there, working your way across to the other side, all the larger people, those are real people in costume.
Wow. And how long would they have to sit there for you?
Well, I photographed him, so it wasn't too terribly long, and I shot them individually. I shot them one at a time, so that way I can play with their composition in the computer before I.
Look at this detail, folks. I mean, the embroidery. I noticed something. I mean, look at this. Just one small detail in the crowd. I mean, it's beautiful embroidery. I mean, that's incredible. And it just looks completely authentic. Did you actually use something for that?
Yeah, that was actually a scarf that I bought. I think it was up in Canada. I think I bought that in Canada. I don't live too far from the Canadian border. I bought that years ago, thinking it'd be really cool in a painting because I love the pattern on that.
Wow.
But all the other costumes, for the most part, were actually from the theater department at Western Washington University up in Bellingham. At the time, you could actually just rent stuff from there. They don't do it anymore. But the costumes of the two people in the foreground, the two guys that I mentioned earlier, are part of the story. It's a story point that they have shabby clothing. And so those I have a friend who's a costumer built those for me specifically for this painting series. And so they're wearing the costumes for that.
Oh, okay. And
then
I see.
As I say, the hands on the far left that we don't see who they belong to. They just kind of come into frame on the far left. They're like, those are actually my hands. That's my camera.
The clapping hands here?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, like I was noticing little things like you have the shadow, it's blue. It's kind of a bluish tint for the shadow.
Yeah, well, it's catching the bounce light from the sky on the top surface of that wall right there.
Wow. Now you have women in the Hippodrome, which would be uncommon, but you don't have too many. I see it looks like a woman here.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not trying to make this absolutely gospel. Because it's just a painting, I want people just to be able to look at it and go, oh, that looks cool. So, whether women were really there with men or not, I don't know. Maybe not. You know that better than me, but it just seems like it'd be kind of boring if it was just men. So,
well, yeah. So from what I've read, it was men only. But even as a writer, once I'm zooming in and I'm writing chapters, sometimes it's very difficult for me to imagine that as a hard rule. So I'm with you that, sometimes you break some of these things. And by the way, if you look, I don't see women like all over the place. It looks like a pretty male dominated space.
Yeah. I made sure that it was not 50-50. It was definitely tilted more towards men than women in the stands.
And that definitely comes across. So just these people so you've selected this camera angle specifically. Yeah. I guess because you get some foreground action and then you get a really good view of the Hippodrome. Is that why you selected this particular?
Well, it's nice because you get a sense of the curved part of the track. So you can see that wall starts to curve as it goes towards the bottom of the frame. But also the reason why we're seeing the back of their heads is because they're in the stands that are actually curving around along with the stadium. And so this seemed like a nice way to be able to help sell that this is it's not a straightaway that goes on forever. It actually does curve around and go back around the other way.
Yep. And then, so I really want to talk about this. This is one of the details that kind of bowled me over. So for those who don't know, in Istanbul, this building back here, this is the Hagia Sophia, which means Church of Holy Wisdom. This church is still here today. It has been converted to a mosque. It has been a mosque since 1453 when the Ottoman Turks came in and took over Constantinople. They did not desecrate this building. The Muslim conqueror who came in there, Mehmet II, was very treated this building very like a sacred space. Like I said, they converted it to a mosque. So today there are 4 minarets. There's 4 minarets surrounding it, and there's a very prominent circular dome. And so when people think of the Hagia Sophia, even if you were going to convert it back to the 6th century, like Mr. Chauvin has done, I would imagine almost every artist in the world making this the full dome that we see on there today. You did not do that. You have a very flat dome. Can you tell us why you selected that detail?
Well, because originally there was a shallower dome on the building, but then it collapsed in an earthquake about 40 years after this takes place. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's structurally not a very good design, and so that's why they went with a hemispheric dome, because it distributes the weight much better. And obviously it does, because it's still there 1,500 years later.
Yeah.
But this one
Well,
was, and again, no one knows exactly what it'll look like, but I'm just kind of conjecturing that this is what it looked like. And again, this is based on what was in Byzantium 1200, so I just kind of ran with what they proposed.
right. So it was a flatter dome. That's exactly right. And like you said, an earthquake damaged it, and they went with, I think you called it a hemispheric dome, which is the much taller, much more ball-like sphere, half of a sphere-like dome. So what's fascinating to me is this flat dome only existed for a handful of decades, and then it has been this hemispheric dome for almost 1,500 years. So your story takes place in this very rare period of time where the Hagia Sophia had this flat dome, and you got that right. Because honestly, like if that detail was wrong, I would obviously be very forgiving, but in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, I wish it was a flat dome. I got exactly what, it's exactly what it would have looked like. And I'll just tell people listening in a little fact. This design, it was extraordinary. This was the center of Christendom until the Vatican was built in the 1500s, which, by the way, St. Peter's Basilica, as we know it today, which we think of as the center of Christendom, was only started because this building fell into the hands of the Ottoman Turks just a decade or so before. So once this building was gone, there was a need for a replacement, and that's why we have the St. Peter's Basilica. It started construction shortly after this fell into Islamic hands. Now, what's also fascinating is this was the largest square structure with a dome on top. It was one of the largest enclosed spaces until I think McCormick Place in Chicago. So this building is quite an extraordinary feat of architecture.
And it was built in 5.5 years.
5.5 years. There was another building there called the Hagia Sophia, and it had kind of a gabled roof. It had a very different look. When the people who read my book, one of the things they complained about, they said, you described the Hagia Sophia in the weirdest way possible. You said it has a gabled roof, and I was like, well, it did. The building that's there in my story is gone now, replaced with the building that's in Eric Chauvin's artwork here. And then this dome, of course, was replaced after the earthquake with the dome that's pretty much there today.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's and another thing about the Hagia Sophia is apparently it was the model for mosques that were built afterwards. I mean, you can kind of see it's the way they have the central dome, and then before the Hagia Sophia, structures that had a dome on top, they didn't have a pendentive. They used a squinch, and this was, I think, if not the first time, it was definitely the first time a pendentive was used on a structure this large before, and it being such a much more elegant solution to converting a circular dome shape to a square building underneath it. The pendentive was a much better way of distributing that weight than a squinch.
Yeah.
So, so this sort of served as the blueprint for mosques to follow.
Yeah, I learned that myself just through the course of studying this. And so when I was in Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia is there with the hemispheric dome, as you call it, with the minarets, and staring at it across the way is the Blue Mosque.
Right.
And I was like, the Blue Mosque. And now the Blue Mosque is one of only 2 mosques with 6 minarets, the other one being in Mecca. And these 2 buildings are staring at each other. And I was like, the Blue Mosque was built after, and it pretty much looks just like the Hagia Sophia. Like you said, it's got the square base, the round dome on top. So I didn't realize it, but the mosque, the design of the mosque stemmed from this early Byzantine architecture of Constantinople, of the Byzantine Empire. Very fascinating. So you've got that, and I also noticed sitting over here, you have this it's out in the distance outside the Hippodrome. Looks like a gold pillar, and there's a gentleman sitting up there. Can you tell us about this detail?
Well, that's the pillar of Justinian and the Augustaian. So my reading of Justinian was that he was kind of, at least the way I'm portraying him in my story, which is different than yours, is that he's kind of full of himself. So there's not only a monument to him at the Augustaian, but also one of the equestrian statues on top of the cathedra is also him as well. So, and again, this is from sources. That wasn't something I made up, but
right.
But yeah, apparently that statue in the Augustaian was there up until after the Renaissance. It'd been there for a real long time. So
yeah, it got smashed up at some point. But it was there for a while. I mean, these are pretty amazing monuments. And by the way, a lot of these things were destroyed during the fourth. You think that during the Islamic conquest of Constantinople that all this stuff would be smashed up. Believe it or not, it was during the Fourth Crusade. A Christian ally came in from the West and sacked Constantinople. It's called the greatest crime in Christendom, where they damaged it. And in fact, now that we're talking about it, you want to tell us about those?
Yeah, so those they don't really know where these horses were originally fabricated. They most likely go back to Greek antiquity, but they were on top of the Carceres in Constantinople for centuries. But during the Fourth Crusade, so the Fourth Crusade were Christians that were supposed to go to the Holy Land to liberate it from the Muslims.
Right.
But they went by way of Venice, and they stayed for quite a while in Venice. They're having ships built or something. They were provisioning their march on the Holy Land from Venice, and somehow during that time they were convinced that they should go to Constantinople and basically pillage it, which is what they did. And so they took these war trophies back with them, including these horses. And so these horses now there's replicas, but these horses were in front of St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice for centuries, but now I think they're in the basement of that building in a museum, and they have replicas that are actually in front of it now. But an interesting thing is that the ones in Venice, they have collars around their necks, because when they took the horses back to Venice from Constantinople, they had to cut their heads off in order to be able to get them into the holds of the ships. And so they made these collars to hide the seam where they put the horses' heads back on their bodies.
So then you accurately remove the collars that one might expect to see here.
Well, these things in real life, in my painting, are only about 3/4 of an inch tall, so it was not. It wasn't a hard thing to remove them. Yeah.
But again, that's a level of detail that, like you said, you're looking at this painting. No one's thinking about that, right? I didn't even know that that's what that was until I was like, oh, there's the 4 horses that you'd see at St. Mark's. But once you zoom in, you see, as far as the artist did his homework. The collars aren't there, and you got what would be a historically accurate image of. So it's a historically accurate image of the horses in a historically, what would you say, an educated guess on how this was arranged, right?
Yeah. So again, I'm not going with accuracy. I'm going with plausibility. So.
Gotcha. Well, and by the way, for any artist, plausibility becomes a big deal. In fact, there's times when I'm writing a chapter where, in fact, I'll tell you an example. There's a character who his nickname is the Pumpkin. He's an actual character. His Greek name is the Colosynthus, and his nickname is the Pumpkin. In all the literature, they call him the Pumpkin. Well, they didn't have pumpkins in the Byzantine Empire. That's kind of a North American phenomenon, the big orange pumpkin. So the right thing to do would not be to call him the Pumpkin. But when I kept writing the Colosynth as his nickname, it just didn't work. So I decided to go with, like you said, something that's practical and understandable rather than perfect accuracy. So, artists have to make these decisions when they're putting all this together. And I think the overall desire, would you say, is that plausibility, right? That you believe what you're looking at.
Yeah, because I know for sure this isn't what it actually looked like, but I figured this interpretation is as good as anybody else's based on what we know about the actual layout and statuary and stuff that was there.
Yeah, this is the best representation I've ever seen. Like you said, Byzantium1200.org is it's a great website. It's got a ton of stuff that I know the gentleman. He actually built out the entire city of Constantinople as of the year 1204. And he's got all sorts of buildings there, and they're very well researched. I mean, academics use his stuff all the time. They built models, and it toured around there. He actually agreed to provide an image, a snapshot of his model, which is on the cover of my book. So
cool.
he was very gracious to share that, and asked for nothing. And he's like, "Go ahead, it's yours." The deal was he had to choose the angle. I had no choice. And so I was like, "You got it." I was like, "It's actually an honor for me to put that on there." So, but the thing was, when you look at his work, it's architectural. It's an architectural wonder, actually, that's been rebuilt in a computer. But when
I've got one other thing I want, if you're interested, I can point out, was that. So one thing that nobody really knows is how they were able to get the starting gates to all open at exactly the same time. And I watched I think it was like a Nova program where they were trying to figure out how the mechanism worked. And so they were thinking that maybe they used animal sinew, that they wound up like a rubber band on a rubber band powered toy airplane. And so they made a mock-up of that, but it did not work at all. And so I thought of something that was a bit more elegant solution. And
what was yours?
So you kind of have to use your imagination here. But if you go close up on these on one of the starting gates, you can see there's kind of like a black V shape that's like it goes from each of so the gates open up from the middle. It's like there's two gates, and they just open, to each side.
Is this the V, upside down V?
Yeah. So you got a pole, you got a push-pull tube that actually attaches to each gate, and that goes to a like a bell crank that would be where they both come together. Now on that bell crank, there'd be another rod that goes up that goes to a shaft that runs the entire back length of the back of the carcass. And so I envision it as each of those cells that make up the individual areas behind the starting gates. The horses would come in from the back, but that wall actually protrudes out a little bit farther than the back of the actual building itself. And so there'd be like a partial wall that would have this shaft that would run the entire length of the building. And so you have these two push-pull tubes go to another linkage that goes up to that shaft, and that shaft rotates. And so as it rotates, that part that comes down either pushes forward and opens up the gates, or it pulls back and shuts the gates. So what operates that shaft in the middle is that you basically have a big catapult. So when it's in the up position, that's when the gates are closed, and then you release the release on the catapult, and there's a weight that pulls it down. And as that weight pulls down, it turns that shaft, which pushes on those push-pull tubes that opens the gates, and they all open at the same time. That makes sense to me. And again, I'm just making this up.
Wow,
that's using technology that would have existed at the time. So it seems plausible to me that that's how they got the gates to open at exactly the same time back then. And
wow, that's something else. See, so for anyone who thinks about art, you're not just drawing cool stuff. You're not just doing that. You're solving historical problems. I mean, scholars, I get into this sometimes in my book. There are debate scholars, like you just said, there's an academic debate on how to get these. You have to pick a side, right? You have to come up with an answer. You have to solve it for your version of this story. And so that's a great detail on how, and not only did you solve it, you had to logically, intellectually solve it, then you had to depict it in the art. And by the way, again, this is what the painting looks like, right? But for anyone who cares, and this is, to me, this specifically is what separates great art from good art, and good art from okay art, and okay art from bad art, is the more you unpack something, the more you unpack the art, the more you understand the art, the more you discover. That, to me, is what makes this great art. And I never would have known that. To me, that's just a design in the gates, right?
Yeah, well, again, it really wasn't important to anybody but me. Since I was painting this for me, that was important to make sure that it made mechanical sense. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then I think, so I will say this. So there was the covered area up here. So that must have been where the aristocrats sat.
Well, I actually have them. That's the two pavilions on the left would be on the far side of the stadium would be where they are. So that's the people that are standing at the railing right there. So that's the upper crust where they sat, because they actually have, so rather than sitting on bleachers, they actually have real seats. I had these people standing there because it was a nice visual element. They're just kind of standing there, taking it in as they're sipping their wine, I suppose. But on the other side, on the Carcaris, I have actual dedicated seating for the upper crust as well. Again, one side for the blues and one side for the greens. I'm sorry, on the Cathesma, not the Carcaris.
Oh,
yeah. So that would, you can see it's partially fenced off, so they're separated from the rabble, and so they have their own seating as well. And so and you can see that on the green side, there's actually a door that goes into the Cathesma, which gives the impression that the only way to get to the seating area is from there, which by extension means they have connections with the emperor that allows them to have that access to have this special seating. Not only and just him, but also separated from the commoners.
So the radicalization of these racing crowds seems to have taken place under the reign of Theodosius II. And he actually, and I did, similar to you, I'll do all this research. Some of it won't even show up in the writing, but I know it, so that my characters know it, right? And so what he did, he's the one who radicalized them, because I was trying to figure out where all this came from, right? And he actually changed the seating in the Hippodrome. It was Theodosius II that did that to give the Greens the preferential seats. So I love that detail. You're saying that he even built a door so it'd be easy for him to talk things over with the Greens if need be. Now, by the time of Justinian was a blue, and he favored the blues, and he really got the blue. He's the one that got the blues really fighting again and winning again in the streets against the Greens, who had decades of.
I tried to be egalitarian, and so you can see that the blues have their own section the way the Greens do on the far side of the Cathesma. So,
Oh yeah, that's fantastic, and this is great. I mean, the Byzantine.org, it's what I think of now that I've seen this is Byzantium.org did the brilliance and imagination of the architecture and the physical buildings and the layout and the spatial arrangements and all that. But what you have done is added that human element here. And this just at every single level tells a story, including your own, where these two gentlemen are hiding in the crowd from Roman soldiers who are now looking for them in a sea of 80,000 fanatical citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the name of your lead character?
Well, on the left is Peter, and on the right is Ewan. He's actually from the British Isles, so he's Ewan, Sir Ewan, actually, Sir Ewan.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. Well, this is a great painting, and I think. Oh, and by the way, I'll just add this in the scene that I found this for, because I'm writing a major scene that takes place in the Hippodrome. Your depiction helped me really understand the Cathesma. My brain was always hovering around this area, this balcony. And when I was looking at yours, I was like, he's really got it to where there's a whole room back here.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a huge chamber. So in my chapter, which is a pretty big chapter, actually, Justinian and Theodora, before they're emperor and empress, they come up in the back area here. And there's a little bit of a storytelling that takes place in this chamber area. And I really try to capture the gravity, because back then, being 3 or 4 stories high, if this is one story, the wall, then you're almost 4 stories up here. That can't be too common. So, and having open sky to either side of a balcony like this, I really tried to capture, based on your painting, the idea of the vertigo that the uninitiated, inexperienced person might experience by walking up to this thing. And not only just being, overhanging into space like this, but to look upon the entirety of the Hippodrome in a single glimpse must have been pretty breathtaking.
Yeah, it must have been a pretty cool place to watch a race.
Oh yeah, and they had multiple races per day, and this is how you would start a riot too, because the people are already amassed. So if you planned it out right, you could storm out of this place and really get into some trouble. So that That is one painting, and I think anyone who loves the Byzantine Empire, who has studied it or has even a passing interest in it, will find a piece of artwork like that to be absolutely astounding and a real contribution, a substantive contribution to this era, in my opinion, in the Byzantine, because like you said, it's gone. You have to imagine it. And so it requires someone like you who has the imagination and the ability to put all that into a single image like that. So, that's what struck me so much. And now we don't have to take as much time with this next one, but this one is a pretty dramatic painting. How did I get this? Give me 1 second. I want to share this one. This is and what was the name of that first one?
Plaudits for Porphyrius.
What was the first word?
Plaudits, like applause. Plaudits for Porphyrius.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yes. And Porphyrius he was like the Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods of that time. In fact, several of the statues on the median are statues of Porphyrius.
Right. Exactly.
Because he was so heavily decorated. Now, this next one is pretty dramatic stuff, guys. Let's take a good look at this thing. So we're at the Spina, just to reorient everybody. Here's the Kathisma up here in the upper left. That's where the emperor sits. We were looking at it from the far corner over here on that side. Now we're down by the starting gates. We're in front of the starting gates on the track with the charioteers. And you have really captured a lot here. You got the strain. I mean, look at the detail here. The straining of the horses as they're coming around the corner. And I love this one here. These guys are almost falling over. They're leaning in to this turn. You see the strain of the chariot's faces. Now, do you want to tell us what's happening here?
Yeah. So in my story earlier, I talked about Sir Ewan. So this is Sir Ewan is actually the featured charioteer here. So in my story, it's kind of a long bit of setup here, but he's here to find something, but he ends up getting caught before he gets it, and he's brought to the emperor. And the emperor is, in my story, Justinian is sort of a Constantinophile. He's just enamored with Constantine, and so he's under the impression that Ewan is actually a descendant of Constantine, and which actually is historically plausible, because Constantine actually did spend time in Britain. His father, is it Constance, was like the governor of Britain before, when Constantine was like a teenager. And later on, Constantine not only brought Christendom to the Roman Empire, but he also brought imperial rule back to a single emperor. Before then, there was 4 emperors and 4 different quadrants of the empire, and he brought it back to a single empire, and then headquartered it in Constantinople. He had his first son was a fellow named Crispus, and inexplicably in history, he had his son murdered, and I haven't found out why that was. But in my story, rather than having him murdered, he actually banishes him to Britain, and there his lineage actually eventually ends up with Ewan being born. So my character really is a descendant of Constantine.
Oh, very cool.
Of not only mythology, but also of actual real history, Roman history. So, but my person is a knight of the Round Table, somebody working for Arthur, and so his allegiance is with Arthur, but the emperor Justinian makes the deal that's like, I will release you to go back to your homeland if you win this race. And so another thing that I made up was that once a year, to celebrate the founding of the city, they celebrate it by having a prisoners tournament. And what that is that the inmates of the local prisons in Constantinople are given an opportunity to win their freedom by participating in this chariot race. Now, of course, the majority of them, probably all of them, have no idea how to race a chariot.
They're probably
so desperate to get out of the squalor of being in the prisons. It's like, I don't care how dangerous it is. It can't be worse than, being in a dark hole with no food.
Yeah, at least go down with a blaze of glory.
Exactly. So So my painting is a depiction of him accepting the terms of this deal that he'll participate in this tournament to win his freedom. Now, what we're seeing here is like the semifinal heat. It's not the last one; it's the one just before the last one. And his hair's longer because he's been in the prisons for like a month or so. He's got a beard, about a month's worth of growth of beard. Back then, it was in style to be clean shaven, and he's wearing the clothing that he came into the city in, which, again, long backstory, but he was basically came into the city as a slave, or at least early in the story, he was sold into slavery. So he's not wearing very fancy clothes to begin with. But you'll notice that the other charioteers are clean shaven, and they're big muscular guys. These aren't guys that look like they've been wasting away in a prison cell for years. So what it is that Ewan has won his previous heats, and the emperor is getting nervous that he might actually win the whole tournament. And he doesn't want him to win the tournament. So he's conspired with his chamberlain Narcissus to actually have real charioteers participate in this race to beat Ewan, but they're dressed as prisoners. So that's why they're wearing the shabby clothing, but they're also clean shaven. It's not like they put a whole lot of thought in trying to disguise their appearance. I mean,
so these are like professional all-stars,
exactly,
pretending to be
prisoners.
Yeah. Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah. So he's got to not only win, but he's got to win against actual real charioteers this time around.
Yeah, I got to say, in a weird, knowing that he looks like he knows what he's doing. He's got his eyes set on something. His horses are taking this pretty seriously as they're leaning in. But he looks like a pro. He looks like he knows what he's doing. And you've even captured in the sense that he doesn't know the outcome. He's just focused on trying to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
Making it work. So that you have Roman numerals on the chariots to tell them apart. Do you want to tell us about maybe how you dressed them and the tools they're using?
Yeah. So like I said earlier, they had their reins actually tied to them. And so I came up with this idea, this belt. My son works with leather, so he actually made that belt for me, made their helmets for them as well.
Oh, wow.
So I just had straps of leather that I had my human models hold as they're posing for me. But it's interesting because when I had tied them up on that ring that's attached to their belt, it automatically kind of wanted to fall into kind of a like a roll shape, like a roll of tape or something. And these are things that it's like you kind of have to see it in real life to know how that's really going to work. So that's just kind of one of those things that's nice about working from a real reference rather than just trying to make it up.
Yeah.
And so the idea here is that he's holding his reins, but it's also still affixed to him. And of course, for the chariot race, they don't give him a knife because that could be used for other purposes. So
right.
So if they end up getting pulled off their horses here, it's like, well, that's actually better for spectacle. It makes the people in the stands happier to see a prisoner get mauled to death. But the other thing that I was saying, how the way I depicted the chariots in the previous painting were wrong, is that when I got to working on this one, I wanted to have a better understanding of how the quadriga worked with the chariots being pulled behind them. And so I found a YouTube video of an equestrian, a guy in England that was trying to solve this puzzle himself. And he actually made the discovery, or at least made a plausible conjecture, that even though they had 4 horses, only 2 horses were actually pulling the chariot, because there is really no extra benefit, because relatively speaking, the chariot with a person on it is like a feather to a horse. There's no real strain that they're pulling against. So by having 2 horses pulling a chariot, even if you had a way of having all 4 horses pulling them, they would not be going any faster than 2 horses doing it. So the reason why they had 4 was because it, A, looked cool, and 2, it was harder to control them. You not only were trying to control horses to pull your chariot forward, but you had these extra horses on the sides that could potentially get tangled up with other teams that are coming around the corner. It was a much more difficult thing for a charioteer to do. I mean, you had to be really good to be able to command 4 horses. And so the way I have them depicted is that the horses on the ends they don't have a yoke that's contributing to pulling the chariot, but they're actually chained to the other horses because they're part of the team.
Wow.
And so the only connection between the chariot itself and the horse team is that um, is the what do you call it? The boom that comes out of the chariot. That is, I have it hanging below the yoke. There's like a leather strap that it holds. It acts kind of like a shock absorber because you know that the horses will be bouncing up and down as they're running, and so those leather straps will absorb that. So rather than being a hard connection with that yoke and the boom being attached to each other, it's just dangling underneath it by those straps, so it can kind of swing and move around without causing a whole lot of stress to the boom or the chariot behind it.
Wow. So you got me thinking. So you have this, what do you call it? This big wooden piece?
Oh, the yoke?
The yoke.
I'm calling it a yoke, yeah.
So the yoke comes up according to your interpretation of what you think it makes sense. Like you said, plausibility is that this connects to the chariot, and then you've got this yoke, and these are your money horses. These are the ones that are doing 90 or the main work.
Yeah.
It's making me think that these must either be flanking the two main horses and almost protectively, or that they may have served some function on tight turns or something where they, like you said, they're not necessarily adding horsepower on the straightaway so much as they are something else. And like you said, at the very least, a measure of difficulty in having to handle four horses. Because I mean, I've ridden a horse. And, just managing one horse can be a handful. Four, you got four different personalities. And, if you watch jockeys or listen to jockeys, because I'm a big Secretariat fan, jockeys will tell you these horses have specific personalities. You have to know how to work them. You have to know when to run them, how to get the most out of them on a straightaway. So now you got to deal with four of these guys, like a hockey line.
Yeah.
This is your line. So that's interesting. And what I love is that you really show that. I didn't even notice that looking through it, but yeah, he's just kind of tacked on here on the edge here. So you just got my wheels spinning, thinking this through myself. Wow. That's fascinating. And like you said, you actually had the leather built out to see how it functions. And like you said, you can think it all you want. When it comes to painting it and making it look plausible, that's a whole different story. It might not work, Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a on my Instagram feed or whatever you call it, my Instagram channel. I've got a little quick video that shows my photo reference of the actual actors and then what they look like in this painting. It just kind of dissolves from one to the other, so you can see what the source material looked like.
Oh, I'll have to check. I will definitely check that out. Yeah, in fact, I'll put what I'll do is I'll put the link in the description of this video, so people can click on it and go right there and check it out. Like I like too, you got the rings here where you could put the leather reins through.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look, if you care to look, anybody, you'll see that, every horse is given this attention. See this ring on the horse back there? I mean, just the amount of detail and the consistency. There's another ring there. So, I mean, it's functional. You do the one thing that I really care about, which is the functionality of the composition. And this is not given. This is not easy stuff. This is highly complex functionality for things that like you said, you don't even have a direct reference. You have to read about academically. You have to hear other possible professionals give their theories, and then you're the judge and jury. You have to decide what's right. And you're in the painting by the time you're doing this. Are there any other details here that you'd like to share?
I've got an Easter egg.
Yes.
So the bas relief on the in the back behind the horses right there, that's actually it's actually from the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. So,
really?
Yeah, I just thought it looked cool, and so I just repurposed it to be the people that are on the turning post.
Oh wow! Wow. Yeah, there's the bundle of sticks. Is it a mirror?
I don't know. To me, it also looked like a giant ping pong paddle, but
whoops. I think I jumped ahead here. Oh, I see what I did. I skipped ahead. There we go. Yeah, very interesting. That is a cool little Easter egg. And also, I just have to say, I appreciate the realism to the gold, these pylons here. There's the eggs you were talking about up there. I thought I saw them somewhere else. That's right. It was from here. So yeah, that's excellent. And the dirt, I mean, even the wheel, you captured each grain of dirt here, guys. You see that? Artists, you want to paint in the big leagues, you got to do the work. Look at this. Anyway, one thing I have to say that I appreciate too, like kind of on the side, is, in the age of AI is not going to inspire many people to become an artist, I don't think, right? This is the kind of thing that will inspire someone to want to be an artist. You see what's possible for you. You think it, you do the homework, you build this out, you make this painting. And you have to have the chops to do it.
Well, and also the fortitude. It's
right.
This took me a year, and I think a lot of people, in fact, I had people say, "Why would you spend so much time on a painting?" It's like, well, because this is what I want to paint, and I don't really mind it. I'm not doing it to make any money, so there's no financial incentive to get it done fast, and then I get it to the amount of finish that I want to be something that I can be proud to say I painted. So, to be a professional artist, this is a stupid way to work. But for someone who's just a hobbyist like me, it's just, it's fun. It allows me to make something that when I die, hopefully some other people will appreciate.
Right. Well, yeah, it might not be practical in a business setting, but anyone who's an artist knows that this comes from inside. This is an inherent need to communicate something through your artistic craft. And when you own it like this, you take that extra time, you could do something pretty special. And I think that's what you did here. This is special. This is special stuff. This isn't just another picture, just another depiction. You've answered questions. You've come up with your theory on how this would work. And then, you put it in there. And then on top of all of that, you're telling a story. I love looking at this, thinking that these guys are big dogs. This is the starting center for the Chicago Bulls. And, these guys know how to get the job done. These are the pros. And, they're dressed down and pretending to be slaves or at least prisoners, and they're all there to set this guy up. And does he know that he's being set up?
At this point in the race, he does know. Yeah, I think early on he doesn't, but now he knows. So now he knows the Emperor is playing dirty.
There he is up there playing dirty. He tends to win this. And is that Theodora right there?
No, that's Narcissus.
Oh, Narcissus. Okay. Yeah, Narcissus was a eunuch.
Yeah, exactly. He's also a general.
And a general. That's right. And he was a very good general. And now my last question is there any evidence at all to support that this was here?
No, you got me. That's my graffiti.
Maybe an ancestor from the Byzantine era. That's great. This is fantastic, and it's whereas that last piece I thought was just overpowering, pure spectacle storytelling, showcasing the stadium and the architecture and the pageantry. This is a very dramatic scene that you've captured. And then this one here. Now this. Less dramatic from a single scene, and yet it's like a landscape, right? Or it's like how it's like a cityscape of the time.
Yeah.
And you have a lot going on here as well. So once again, we've got, and what was the name of that last piece, by the way?
That was Blood and Dust.
Blood and Dust. So this is so this one is Blood and Dust, and then which is beautiful. I think this is a good one to buy. What's the name of this one?
I just call this one Constantinople at Sunset.
Beautiful. You got like these lavenders. You got the historically accurate Hagia Sophia. Got all sorts of rooftops at all different levels. You got the column of Justinian. Now I know enough to know just enough. You have the Theodosian walls here. This is the Bucolian Palace, by the way, folks. Yeah. This is the Chapel of St. Stephen's, which was inside this. This is a walkway that comes down right up to the water's edge here. The Bucolian house had a private harbor, And in my story, just so you know, the women's quarters is up here. It's on the third floor. See how it looks like the windows are arranged? Looks like there's a floor here. And this would have a view of the sunrise that would be spectacular. So anyway, that's where I put the women's quarters. So it's just cool to see that you've got, it would work even in this photo. And then, of course, you've got the boat with the late Latin sail, which is a triangular sail common at that time. So now tell us about it. Walk us through this for us, if you don't mind.
In the story, this is the first time that Ewan sees the city, and they've come up. They came from Alexandria by way of Rhodes, and now they've come through the Hellespont, through the Sea of Marmara. They're on the Sea of Marmara right now.
Yep.
And now we're finally approaching the city. So he's seeing it for the first time, and Peter is with them. And so Peter is actually, during this scene, is telling Ewan about all the new buildings on the skyline that weren't there 5 years before him because of the Nika revolts. And so he's pointing things out to him and saying, okay, well, here's where the riots started, and here's where I could see that the new Hagia Sophia, there used to be another one there. He's pointing out I always mispronounce, is it the Zeuxippus baths? Is that how you pronounce it?
I call it Zeuxippos,
okay.
But your guess is as good as mine.
So, pointing that out, of course, the Column of Justinian, of course, the Hippodrome. And when he's recounting the Hippodrome, that's when he's telling about how, thousands of people were murdered in there as a result of the Nika revolts. And so, and just how, yes, the city is beautiful, but a big price was paid for it to look like this.
It's the scene of the crime.
Yeah, pretty much. So without knowing the backstory, it just looks like it's just a pretty cityscape. But actually, when you know the backstory, it's actually quite sinister, because you know that evil does happen here.
Oh yeah, 100%. And the Nika revolt is the centerpiece of my third book, by the way. So it's just I've been building up to it very slowly. Even in book one, I have a lot of references that are hinting to it. But this is fantastic. And for other people who might not know, like this lighthouse, I've read things where there's actually like a debate on where this lighthouse was. Some people have it here, where this tower is, and some people have it here. I've seen artists with different depictions. I've even seen a depiction where it's back here somewhere, which makes the least sense, because you'd want it up front. Here, either this tower or where you have it are the two that make sense, because it's there to prevent ships, from crashing into the shoreline there. Yeah, you got the walls. Now, I think you told me that technically the Hippodrome isn't actually that high, that you actually changed some of the elevation for a dramatic effect.
Yeah, so I based all my structures on what Byzantium 1200 had done. They have a book they put out called Walking Through Byzantium, what do they call it? The Great Palace region, I think. And
Yep.
So what I did is I rebuilt everything that they had in their reconstructions. I built them myself in the computer, and then laid them out here. And they had key buildings, and so I tried to make my own versions of all the key buildings that they had in there, just to make it as historically accurate as possible. Of course, a lot of these buildings didn't exist at this time period; they were built later. But I also added just some nondescript buildings intermixed in there too, just to kind of fill it out.
Right.
But in the actual typology of the actual real peninsula that this part of Constantinople is built on, you would not have this kind of view of this buildings. It would be much flatter. And so I took some license by actually making it a little taller, so we can be able to see these things better from the water, from the point of view that we are for this painting.
Yeah, and now that's an example of an artistic decision, right? That's a purely artistic. So like, you've spent a lot of time telling us about how a lot of your decisions are based on plausibility, functionality, really thinking it through. And then here, for any artist listening too, you have to make these decisions. When do you change something for an effect that you feel, the artist, feels is an important change to make? I will say, when I first saw it, I was kind of stunned, not by the change, because I didn't even think of it at first. In fact, you're the one who told me that you had changed the elevation. But I remember looking at it and I was like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen it like that. My thought was, I didn't realize the Hippodrome was that high. that looks amazing. And I was gawking at it. And then he said, well, I actually kind of adjusted it. I'm like, well, that's why, because it has quite a power when you see it like that up in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got the elevation there with the city walls. You had some stuff in the distance. You have some buildings and rooftops in the distance. I mean, a lot going on. And just for other folks to know, part of the Bucolian house is still there. In fact, these 3 windows are still there, right there. Now, I think it's cordoned off. The frames and stuff are still there. Like some of this is still standing. It's a ruin. And this is a highway now. This is not waterfront anymore. There's a highway here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of like a hill. And you could stand here if you wanted, if they let you back there, you could stand there and look out. So it's interesting to see your depiction of it, to kind of imagine it from back then as well. Any other, so it looks like you used these are like purples or like lavender colors, right?
Well, yeah, again, it's opposite from where the sun is. So you're getting a little bit of bounce from the sky to give you some fill light in there. That'll be cooler than the key light from the sun.
Wow. And so anyway, there you go, folks. I mean, a real skyline of Constantinople in the 6th century, around the year 540 or thereabouts, as while they're entering Byzantium for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And witnessing the new city that Justinian has built from the ashes of the city he pretty much burned down in the Nika riots, or that were burned down in the Nika riots.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, you went with an interior depiction of the Hagia Sophia as it was in the 6th century.
Yeah, so this is supposed to, again, it's the year 540, and it was completed in 537, I think. So I wanted the interior to be what would be plausibly accurate to that time period, and things that are different from, especially now that it's a mosque, but on the floor and the actual sanctuary itself were these architectural elements that aren't there now. And so you had this thing it was actually in the dead center of the sanctuary called an ambo, which it was like a raised platform that scripture would be read from, and you had these staircases on both sides that's how you access it. You had this one here, and there's also one on the back. Then beyond that, you would have this templon, which would be the thing that separated the sacred space from where the worshipers would be. And this is actually the predecessor to it. Later in Eastern Orthodox Christianity became known as
iconostasi.
Iconostasi, yeah. So I kind of allude to that by having these icon tapestries hanging from it.
I love it.
And then beyond that is so then you would actually, and there's that where it says INBI, that would actually be where the altar would be, and so that's where they would have the your communion ceremony happen and so forth. And then beyond that, there'd be these, it's almost like raised bleachers that I forget what that's called actually off the top of my head. They have those in the Irene, which is the other church that's just next door to the Hagia Sophia. That actually I think was technically built before the Hagia Sophia. And so they don't really know exactly what that was, but to me, it just seems like that would be seating for priests. I mean, that makes the most sense. So that's how I'm envisioning it when I'm portraying it in this painting right here.
Hold on, we had a little hiccup there. Okay, so you saw, your answer to this was priests would be sitting there.
Yeah, I just think it'd be like seating for them. Yeah.
And notice, like, you have so obviously they had no electricity back then. You know, it's not, we know that, but to an artist or like a writer, well, you had used a lot of candles. So, yeah. It's actually stunning to believe, in fact, Amadeus has a good depiction of how much candle usage there was in the background. If you start paying attention to the background, well, I like how you have this candle maker here. His job is to light all these things. You can imagine how tedious that would be, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I got him on this side. And there's another one on the other side. And there's another one is on the top floor. He's kind of just looking down at all the people. not really doing his job.
Okay, so these guys are, and I like how you have some of them lit, some of them not quite lit yet.
Yeah.
And then where's the guy who's
he's up in that in the upper right. If you
upper right?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Johnny, do your job. So he's slacking a little bit. Yeah, the acolytes. That's great. He's taking a break. And then you have like the women's quarter. Is that right up here?
Yeah. So what the reading I was doing was that the men were on the bottom floor and the women were up in on the second floor. So that's how I have them separated out.
Right now. So just to let people know, okay, well, let's do a couple more details too, because I was going to show what it looks like today, but and why a painting like this is so valuable, because especially with this kind of level of detail, because today it's a mosque, so it does not look like this, and you can't just redecorate it. It's a mosque. It's going to stay a mosque. So you really can't see what it would look like unless someone took the time to paint this or build this out and to show us. You got some of the the early Greek Orthodox priests here, and I see you got stained glass back here. Did you just guess on this?
Yeah, that's just my invention. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other details you'd like to share about this?
Just maybe on the dome. So this is the underside of the dome we saw in the Hippodrome painting. So it's a shallower pitch to it.
Right.
And so the question would be, well, it's not like they didn't know that a hemisphere dome would be a stronger structure. Why did they build this? And so my own personal feeling, so this building was not designed by architects. It was designed by mathematicians. And so my guess is that, and if we maybe scroll down, I don't know if people that are watching this know what a pendentive actually is, but we can point that out.
So, I don't know what a pendentive is either.
So that triangular piece right below the dome, it kind of comes down to a point. That's a pendentive.
Okay.
Yeah, and today it actually has pictures of what would they be called?
Mosaics.
Well, they're like cherubs. They're like these really creepy looking winged creatures that are painted on there now, or actually mosaics. But I just did, since this was just a few years after the completion, I just made it pretty plain. But what's nice about a pendentive is this triangular shape is a very elegant way of transferring the weight of that dome down to where the piers are that bring that weight all the way down to the floor. And as I was saying before the invention of the pendentive, they used a squinch, and you can probably look up on the internet what that looks like. They look really neat, but it's kind of like it's a very detailed, frilly looking thing that doesn't look as elegant as a pendentive. So I think that's why there is the switch to going to using this method of weight transference instead. Oh, but so why did they go with a shallower dome? So my feeling is they did that because it was bathed in gold-backed mosaic tile, and you had those clerestory windows. So my feeling is they did that shallower pitch as a way of reflecting that light down into the sanctuary. If it was dome, you wouldn't have that as a reflective surface because it would just be hidden in its own shadow. But by having it be more of a flat surface, it would allow it to actually be able to act like a mirror to reflect some of that light down. So that's my own conjecture. I'm totally wrong, I'm sure, but
that's a great theory. I was actually curious what your theory was, since you really do think these things through. Because the idea was, when, like I said, two mathematicians, I think it was Isidore and Anthemius of Tralles, very famous guy, they came to design this thing. And like you said, Justinian is very egotistical. I have in the book that I wrote, he's not there yet. He will get there. But he would put his thumb on the scales of these things. So I can very well imagine him saying, well, I want it to reflect. I want a lot of reflection. Can we lower the dome? And I can picture those guys being like, you probably don't want to do that if they're, it's not sturdy. And he's like, I do it anyway, which was obviously the bad call. But the idea was that these windows around here would let in all the sun, and it would look like the dome was floating. If you're standing down below and looking up, it was supposed to look like the dome was floating above you, like the kingdom of heaven. So it's a good theory, because if that was the desired effect, then the additional reflection from the gold tile would augment that effect. It just wasn't meant to work. So yeah, that's fascinating. So that's what it looks like at the time. I think that's a very good depiction of what it looked like at the time. So when I was there, I took a picture, and I was so upset because I had my camera on this weird setting, and everything was blurry. Every shot.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But I had like 2 or 3 pictures that came out crystal clear. And one of them is of the Hagia Sophia. So I took this picture, and they have these large Islamic discs set up. Like you could see, you could see the glowing effect of the sunlight as it comes in through these windows. And it's weathered. It's got centuries of use. So to see Mr. Chauvin's art of a squeaky clean Hagia Sophia in a pure Christian light, it was quite a treat, and you couldn't see it anywhere else. Definitely not to that level of detail. So, like I said, this is like the one picture I have. So I have very clear imagery in my head of the interior of the Hagia Sophia. So when I saw your art, I was like, oh, this is great. Who did this? So anyway, those are 4 pieces that Mr. Chauvin was very courteous to spend this time to walk us through and to share the details and the thinking that go through it. I think for any artist, it's not just painting a cool thing. Like, you are doing all these other things if you want to hit those high notes. You've inspired me. Like I said, I've looked at your art, and it's helped me see. And by the way, I'm not just some guy who decided to look into. I've been studying this and thinking about this and trying to get it right in my head for decades, since the 90s, since 1992 when I first grabbed that book. So when I'm looking at your art and I'm seeing really fully realized scenes that are really well thought out and beautiful to look at with that level of detail, like, you're showing me something I've never seen before. And I feel like I've spent quite a bit of time, thinking about these kinds of places. So, it is, and probably you will if ever you read the follow-up books, you'll see traces. You're like, I bet that was from looking at my paintings.
and I would be super stoked to know that I had a hand in that, because, like I said, I loved your first book. I thought it was fantastic. So 2 things I can't wait. One is just to read the next one, and 2 is how you do that character arc where they go from being virtuous, nice people to being the people we know from history eventually. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Well, I'll tell you, book 2 takes a much darker turn. Like, it almost ends like a Disney. They're really happy. They seem to be good people. They seem to have more genuinely positive motives. And the second book explores who do you have to become if you're actually going to not just wield power, but fight off the kinds of people that are wielding power and play
Right.
dirty. Are you going to cross some lines? Are you willing to cross those lines? So the big shift starts to happen in book 2, and then book 3 is where we end. It's going to be a very detailed focus on the Nika riots. I have big plans for that book 3, and it's like, my original plan was to write the 3rd book about the Nika riots. And then as I kept thinking it through and I started to build out my little details, I started it further out. And now by the time I get there, I will have earned this moment in the Nika riots. I'll have earned it because we will know these people. We will know all the details. And what will happen should be an overwhelming climax, I hope. So
I've got one other question.
Yes.
So there is a scene early on in the first book where so Theodora's younger sister, you talk about how she swats a flea away or something. And I was wondering, is that foreshadowing with what Theodora's ultimate end is later on?
No, I did not do that intentionally along those lines. That's interesting. No, that was not. That was meant to be a more material detail for poverty that I felt like, it's familiar enough for most people to at least know what a flea is and all that, but to have to live there and that you don't get, you're there, you're going to sleep in this blanket and those fleas are going to be there and they're going to. So that was more of a detail for abject poverty, but
Okay.
not probably what you're thinking. That's a good detail, though.
Yeah. I thought, boy, this guy's really thinking ahead.
Well, I'll tell you this. I have almost every chapter is telling the story you just read, and it also has information about future storytelling. So there are layers that if you ever do read all of these and you go back to the first book, you'll see all these little Easter eggs in there
Well, good.
in almost every chapter that are leading up to what is going to happen in book 3. So there are some 3-dimensional chess moments, but that wasn't one of them, to be honest.
So do you have a date for when you're releasing the second book?
Well, it's about 75% done. I think the second book will be out next year, because you know how it is. Once you're done, that's just the beginning.
Right.
And then there's the book production, and I'm actually going to republish the first book so that the covers match, and I want to put a map in there. I want to put a map of Constantinople in there, the empire, and I want to add an afterword where I really lay out what is historically accurate, because people might not realize, just like you understand, like you have to embellish, you have to be able to fill in the gaps, you have to solve this, but there are actual things in there that are historically accurate all the way through. And I think I've noticed that when I've told people, I'm like, oh yeah, he's a real person, or that really happened. They're like, oh wow, they appreciate the story more. So I think I would like to go back and add an afterword to let them know, hey, what you just read, yeah, it's historical fiction, but a lot of it is brought right out of the sources. A lot of it's true.
Yeah.
So,
well, very cool. Yeah, and actually, when I said I read your novel, I didn't actually read it. I listened to the audio version on Audible, which was
awesome,
fantastic, because I got to hear that wonderful music that you commissioned for it as well. So it was great.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
that makes me feel so good. Yeah, she's a very close personal friend of mine. I've known her for decades. She's a musician. She used to play for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
And Moby, remember the techno Moby?
Yeah.
She toured with him for a while. I actually saw her in Greece when she played. Yeah, I was single back then. I could go and do whatever I wanted, But yeah, she's a great musician, and she wrote that music. I said, what if there were women professional musicians writing this music? What would they have written back then? Like, can you? So that's what she did. That was her. That was
a nice.
I loved it.
Yeah, no, it was great. Yeah, so you were actually you were in the background as I was working on my current painting. So that was. Oh,
cool. That's great. Yeah. Well, I am honored. Yeah, I appreciate it, and I'll tell you what. I know we've taken up a lot of time, and I just want to tell you I'm very grateful that you took this time to walk it through. There are a lot of people who love the Byzantine Empire that are really going to enjoy this.
For the people that kind of relating to what you're saying about at least the way that I work, if anybody wants to see how I work, I made a stop motion movie of me painting the Hippodrome painting. It's you can find the link on my website. So it actually shows how because I work in a kind of an unusual way, but so you won't see me painting. You'll see the painting paint itself because it's stop motion. But I actually commissioned some original work for that as well. But it starts out looking like it's a educational film from the 1970s, just kind of a little background on me, but I made it look like it was from 50 years ago. No reason. I just thought it'd be fun. But then
the Hippodrome and you.
What's that?
The Hippodrome and you.
Yeah.
Like those little
but if you click the link in my website, you can see if anybody wants to see how I actually worked.
So what I will do is I will provide those links in the description below. If you're watching this, please click on those links and check them out. And also, if you would like to have this art in your home, go to chauvinart.com. So if you are a Byzantine enthusiast, if you love art, if you love the empire, then consider purchasing a print and putting it in a frame and putting it on your wall. I think we showed you the amount of detail that went into this. You'd be putting a true work of art up on your wall.
And the prints look amazing. They look really good. I work with a local printer that I supervised their production, and it looks really good. So if you get it full size, I mean the original size to the painting, you're getting a really good facsimile of what the real painting looks like.
What is the full size?
They're 27 by 40 inches. All of them are the same size.
I wish you could see. I got a painting of Empress Theodora. I have a Byzantine skyline, a painting sitting there, but it's post 1500, so there's minarets and stuff.
Yeah.
So now I get to finally put up the real one, you know. So, well, anyway, Mr. Chauvin, we really appreciate all the time you spent kind of walking us through and describing what it's like to work in Hollywood, to be an artist, to be a matte painter, and then also to take the time to walk us through these tremendous paintings that you've given the world. So thank you. And is there anywhere else people can find you?
I guess Instagram on my website. That's pretty much the only social media I have. So if anybody wants to stop by and say hi, I'd appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, thanks again. And we'll be signing off, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Doug.